The perfect family photo hung on the wall of the Bennett home in Graystone Ridge. Clara's gentle smile, Mark's steady gaze, young Lily's bright eyes. A portrait of suburban bliss captured in a gilded frame. But that frame would soon hold nothing but memories of what once was. Have you ever wondered what truly happens behind closed doors? In homes just like yours, where morning coffee brews and evening meals are shared, devastating secrets often hide in plain sight. The Bennett family learned this truth in the most brutal way imaginable. "No one ever thinks it will end in blood," whispered a neighbor who witnessed the aftermath. But when betrayal cuts deep enough, even the most controlled people can break. What drives a respected financial consultant to commit an act so violent it shocks an entire community? What desperate need for connection pushes a mother to cross boundaries that should never be breached? And how does a daughter rebuild her life when the two people she trusted most have shattered her world completely? In the quiet suburbs where children once played freely, the Bennett name now carries a different weight. Their story isn't just about an affair or a murder. It's about the dangerous consequences of emotional neglect, the desperate search for validation, and how years of unspoken resentment can explode in a single moment of rage. Have you noticed the silent distance growing between you and someone you love? Would you recognize the warning signs before it's too late? Today, we examine how a stolen glance between a lonely wife and her daughter's boyfriend ignited a chain reaction that ended with a body on a garage floor and 3 lives forever destroyed. This isn't just another crime story. This is a warning about what happens when we bury our needs, hide our truths, and let silence reign in our most intimate relationships. The Bennett family's tragedy could have been prevented. By the end of this story, you'll understand exactly how and why it matters for your life too. Graystone Ridge prided itself on manicured lawns, book clubs, and families who seemed to have it all figured out. The Bennett home, a 2-story colonial with blue shutters and a well-tended garden, stood as a testament to suburban achievement. Neighbors nodded approvingly at the family who lived there. Hard-working, respectable, normal. Clara Bennett, 42, moved through her days with practiced efficiency. The neighborhood committee chair, the devoted mother, the supportive wife, roles she performed with quiet resignation. Those who knew her years before could hardly reconcile this muted version of Clara with the vivacious woman who once painted vibrant canvases and laughed without restraint. That Clara had slowly faded, replaced by someone who measured her words and watched the clock for her husband's return, only to feel the familiar ache when he arrived home with little to say. Mark Bennett, 45, built his identity around his career as a financial consultant. Colleagues described him as brilliant, focused, and reliable, the same words his family might have used, though with different meaning. At work, his attention to detail earned him promotions. At home, it manifested as criticism over forgotten errands or misplaced items. The emotional distance he maintained wasn't malicious. Mark simply believed providing financial security was enough to prove his love. The language of feelings had never been one he spoke fluently. Between them stood Lily Bennett, 19, navigating the cooling embers of her parents' marriage while forging her own path. With her mother's creative sensitivity and her father's sharp intellect, Lily excelled at her first year of college while carefully monitoring the emotional climate at home. She perfected the art of diffusing tension, a joke when her father criticized, a change of subject when her mother's eyes grew distant. Lily had become the unofficial emotional translator of the Bennett household. Into this delicate balance stepped Ethan Carter, 20. With an easy confidence and genuine warmth, Ethan brought fresh energy whenever he visited. His admiration for Lily was evident in the way he leaned forward when she spoke, the thoughtful gifts that showed he listened. A sophomore studying business, Ethan represented everything Mark approved of in a potential son-in-law, while his natural charm won Clara over immediately. Lily finally found someone worth bringing home, Clara had commented to her friend over coffee. What remained unsaid? How refreshing it felt to have someone new at their dinner table, someone who asked questions and seemed interested in the answers. The neighbors saw only dinner parties and holiday decorations. They didn't notice how Mark and Clara rarely stood close to each other anymore, or how conversations between them consisted mainly of scheduling and finances. They couldn't see how, during family movie nights, an invisible line divided the couch. Lily and Ethan on one side, Clara alone on the other, Mark often absent entirely, working late again. The tension wasn't in raised voices or slammed doors. It lived in the silence that stretched between attempted conversations, in averted gazes and separate bedtimes. It was a quiet fracturing that none of them acknowledged aloud, but all of them felt. Slow-motion collapse disguised as everyday life. It began with small moments, invisible to anyone watching, yet significant in their accumulation. Clara noticed how Ethan would help clear the dinner table without being asked, something Mark hadn't done in years. She found herself lingering in the kitchen when Ethan arrived early to pick up Lily, appreciating his genuine interest in her day. These conversations, initially brief and casual, gradually lengthened as both discovered shared interests in classic films and historical fiction. "Mrs. Bennett, have you seen the new adaptation of that book you mentioned?" Ethan would ask, his enthusiasm infectious. Clara couldn't remember the last time someone had followed up on something she'd mentioned in passing. When Lily stayed late at the campus library during midterms, Clara found herself seated across from Ethan in the living room, no longer rushing to find excuses to leave. Their conversations deepened, from books to dreams deferred, from current events to personal disappointments. "I wanted to open an art gallery once," Clara admitted one evening. "Sometimes I wonder who I might have become if I hadn't put everything aside for the family." Ethan listened in a way that made her feel visible again. "It's never too late," he'd said, his eyes meeting hers a moment longer than appropriate. The compliments followed naturally, innocent at first, then increasingly bold. "You're the most interesting person in this house," he told her once when they were alone. The words filled a void Clara hadn't acknowledged was consuming her. The night that changed everything arrived with a thunderstorm in late autumn. Lily called to say she'd stay at her friend's apartment near campus due to the weather. Mark was away at a conference. The house, usually so quiet, seemed to amplify with the sound of rain against windows as Clara and Ethan found themselves alone. They sat in the dim living room, the television forgotten as conversation flowed from casual to confessional. Clara spoke of her loneliness within her marriage, how years of emotional neglect had hollowed her. Ethan revealed his own insecurities, his fear of not measuring up to expectations. "Sometimes I feel like I'm playing a role," he admitted, "like nobody sees the real me." "I see you," Clara had whispered, not recognizing her own voice. The touch of his hand against hers should have triggered alarm. Instead, it ignited something Clara had believed long extinguished. When he moved closer, she didn't pull away. When his lips met hers, she responded with a hunger that shocked them both. What followed was a 6-week descent into secrecy. Calculated meetings when Lily had classes. Text messages with coded language. Stolen moments in corners of the house where they'd never been caught. Each encounter carried dual sensations, exhilarating validation paired with crushing guilt. For Clara, the affair filled empty spaces left by years of emotional abandonment. Every time Ethan looked at her with desire, it countered the invisibility she felt with Mark. Each secret rendezvous temporarily masked the hollowness of her daily existence. For Ethan, barely an adult himself, the relationship represented forbidden excitement and artificial maturity. He mistook the thrill of secrecy for depth of feeling, the validation of seducing an older woman for genuine connection. Neither considered the devastation they were creating, a bomb with a shortening fuse placed directly beneath Lily's world. Have you ever noticed how betrayal begins with small permissions? The extended glance, the personal text message, the conversation that crosses professional or family boundaries. These warning signs often hide in plain sight, dismissed as harmless until they've grown too powerful to control. What emotional voids are you or your loved ones trying to fill? And who might be waiting to exploit them? Like this video if you've ever witnessed relationship warning signs that others missed. Your experience might help someone recognize danger before it's too late. Lily first noticed the change in Ethan's eyes, how they would dart away when she mentioned family dinners. His once constant stream of texts slowed to occasional messages. When together, his phone remained face down, password newly changed. Small shifts that scratched at her intuition. "You seem different lately," Lily mentioned one afternoon as they studied in the campus coffee shop. "Just stressed about finals," Ethan replied, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. When they were together, he checked his phone constantly, but angled the screen away from her view. He began declining weekend visits to her home, citing study groups and part-time job commitments. The excuses accumulated like fallen leaves, individually plausible, collectively suspicious. The discovery came on a winter afternoon. Ethan had stepped outside to take a call, leaving his phone on the Bennett living room table. A notification illuminated the screen, a message preview that made Lily's heart stall. "Miss you. Can you come over when she's at her evening class tomorrow?" The sender, CB, Clara Bennett. With trembling fingers, Lily picked up the phone. The passcode she knew, Ethan's mother's birthday, still worked. She scrolled through weeks of exchanges between her boyfriend and her mother. Intimate conversations, plans for secret meetings, photos that seared her vision and burned into her memory. The phone slipped from her hand as physical pain bloomed in her chest. The betrayal wasn't just romantic. It was the systematic demolition of every relationship she valued, every truth she believed. That night, Lily waited until her father retreated to his home office. She confronted Clara in the kitchen, voice low but steady. "How long have you been sleeping with Ethan?" Clara's coffee mug crashed to the floor, black liquid spreading across white tile like an accusation. "Lily, I can explain." "Explain what?" "How you stole my boyfriend. How you both lied to my face for months." Clara reached for her daughter, tears streaming. "It wasn't planned. I was so lonely, and he—" "Don't you dare blame him. He's 20 years old. You're my mother." Their voices escalated, each word sharper than the last. Neither noticed Mark standing in the doorway, his face transformed by a dawning comprehension. "What did you just say?" His voice cut through the chaos. The silence that followed lasted only seconds, but seemed eternal. Clara's confession emerged in fragments, each admission bringing fresh color to Mark's face. Lily collapsed into a dining chair, watching her family implode in real time. "You brought him into our home," Mark said, his controlled voice more frightening than shouting would have been. "You betrayed our daughter with her own boyfriend under our roof." The accusations flew like shattered glass. Mark's years of emotional absence, Clara's desperate bid for attention, Lily's devastation at the dual betrayal. By midnight, the Bennett home had transformed into a battlefield of raw emotion. Doors slammed. Ultimatums were issued. Photographs were torn from frames. The foundations of their family cracked wide open, revealing years of unaddressed pain beneath the polished surface. None of them slept that night. None of them knew that sleep would soon be the least of their concerns. The morning after the revelation brought no peace to the Bennett home. Clara retreated to the guest bedroom. Lily locked herself in her room, refusing to speak to either parent. Mark moved through the house like a ghost, his face blank, his thoughts impenetrable. It was late afternoon when Ethan's car pulled into the driveway. He had been summoned by Lily's cryptic text. "They know everything. We need to talk." Mark watched from the kitchen window as the young man hesitated at the front door. Something cold and foreign settled in his chest, a sensation he'd never experienced in his 45 years. Not quite anger, not quite grief. Something without a name that seemed to lower his body temperature degree by degree. "He's here," Mark announced to no one in particular. Clara emerged from the guest room, eyes red-rimmed and pleading. "Mark, please, let me handle this." But Mark was already moving toward the door, his normally calculated steps now mechanical. He intercepted Ethan on the front porch. "Sir, I came to speak with Lily," Ethan began, his rehearsed apology dying on his lips as he registered Mark's expression. "The garage. Now." Mark's voice was unnaturally calm. "My daughter doesn't want to see you." Confusion crossed Ethan's face, but he followed Mark around the side of the house. The garage door rolled open. A space filled with tools, sporting equipment, and boxes of holiday decorations. Mark's sanctuary on weekends, where he built bookshelves and fixed appliances while avoiding conversations with his wife. "Mr. Bennett, what happened between Clara and me?" "Clara," Mark interrupted. "Not Mrs. Bennett anymore." Ethan stepped back. "Sir, it was a mistake. We both know that." "A mistake," Mark repeated, the word hollow in his mouth. "You came into my home. You dated my daughter. You looked me in the eye over dinner while sleeping with my wife." Years of controlled emotions, frustrations at being taken for granted, rage at missing his daughter's childhood for career advancement, resentment over his emotionally barren marriage, crystallized in that moment. Every time Mark had swallowed his words, maintained his composure, chosen silence over confrontation, had led to this moment. "You destroyed my family," Mark said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "It wasn't like that," Ethan protested, backing toward the garage door. "It just happened. We didn't plan to hurt anyone." Mark's hand closed around a hammer from his workbench. "Nothing just happens, boy." The first swing missed as Ethan ducked. The second connected with his shoulder, sending him stumbling backward into a stack of storage containers. The third swing ended any possibility of reconciliation or resolution. What followed wasn't a fight so much as an eruption of 20 years of suppressed rage. Mark's carefully constructed self-control shattered completely. Each blow represented a different betrayal: his wife's infidelity, his daughter's suffering, his own failures as a husband and father. Rational thought abandoned him entirely as primitive emotion took control. Ethan's attempts to defend himself weakened with each impact. His pleas for mercy faded to whimpers, then to silence. The hammer rose and fell in a terrible rhythm until Mark stood alone in the crimson aftermath, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The garage door from the kitchen opened. Clara and Lily stood frozen in the doorway, drawn by the sounds of struggle. Their screams seemed to come from far away as Mark looked down at what he'd done, at the still form of the young man who, just months ago, he had welcomed into his home. The hammer slipped from Mark's fingers, clattering against the concrete floor. Blood marked his hands, his shirt, his face. But the most frightening transformation was in his eyes, the vacant stare of a man who had crossed a line he could never uncross. "Call 911, he told his wife and daughter, his voice oddly steady. Then he sat on a nearby stool and waited for the authorities to arrive, as the full weight of his actions began to settle over the garage like a shroud. Would you recognize the warning signs of emotional repression before they lead to catastrophe? The human mind can only contain unexpressed feelings for so long before they demand release. Comment below if you or someone you know has experienced the dangerous consequences of buried emotions. Understanding these patterns might prevent another tragedy like the Bennetts. Police cruisers lined Oakwood Drive within minutes of Clara's 911 call. Red and blue lights reflected off neighboring windows as officers led Mark Bennett, still covered in blood, to the back of a patrol car. Neighbors emerged from their homes, cell phones recording the scene that would soon dominate national headlines. Financial consultant murders daughter's boyfriend in jealous rage. He just sat there, Officer Daniels would later testify. Didn't resist, didn't speak, like he was somewhere else entirely. Graystone Ridge transformed overnight. The community that once hosted block parties now buzzed with horrified fascination. Parents pulled children indoors when Clara appeared. Friends who had shared coffee with her for years now crossed the street to avoid conversation. Text messages from former confidants went unanswered, replaced by anonymous calls accusing her of destroying two families. "We thought we knew them," a neighbor told reporters camped outside the Bennett home. How do you live next door to people for 10 years and miss something like this? The investigation proceeded with methodical precision. Forensic teams documented the garage scene. Blood spatter analysis confirmed a sustained attack rather than a moment of impulse. The hammer bore only Mark's fingerprints, undermining any potential self-defense claim. Autopsy results showed Ethan suffered 17 separate blows, far exceeding what would be considered necessary to neutralize a threat. Most damning were the digital records recovered from both Clara and Ethan's phones. 6 weeks of text messages detailed their affair in explicit terms. Location data confirmed meetings when Lily was at school. Photos exchanged between them provided prosecutors with a clear timeline of betrayal. The electronic evidence tells a story of calculated deception, the lead detective explained at a press conference. This was not a spontaneous relationship. Both parties took deliberate steps to hide their actions. Clara retreated into her sister's home 30 miles away, unable to face the community's judgment or her daughter's pain. Reporters tracked her there, publishing unflattering photos of her grief-ravaged face alongside sensationalist headlines. The mother who betrayed everything, and how the midlife crisis turned deadly. She barely ate, barely slept. Each news report drove the knife of guilt deeper. In mandated therapy sessions, Clara struggled to articulate how a need for connection had blinded her to the consequences of her actions. "I never thought anyone would be hurt," she repeated, the inadequacy of those words echoing in the therapist's office. Not physically hurt. Lily withdrew from college mid-semester, unable to face classmates who now recognized her name from news reports. She moved in with her maternal grandparents, changing her phone number and deactivating social media accounts to escape the constant messages. Some sympathetic, most cruelly judgmental. Her grief existed in multiple dimensions. Mourning Ethan while processing his betrayal, losing her father to prison, and struggling with complex feelings toward her mother. In her darkest moments, Lily felt responsible. If she had noticed the signs earlier, if she had never brought Ethan home, perhaps everyone she loved would still be whole. The Ethan Carter Memorial Fund, established by his parents, received thousands in donations. Outside the courthouse where Mark's preliminary hearing took place, supporters held photos of the smiling college student whose future had been violently cut short. Inside, prosecutors built their case methodically, arguing that Mark Bennett had committed a premeditated act driven by rage, jealousy, and wounded pride. As the case moved toward trial, 3 lives lay in ruins, and a community grappled with the realization that the most dangerous threats often hide in plain sight, behind the doors of homes that look just like their own. State versus Bennett began 9 months after Ethan's death. The courthouse steps became a battlefield of competing narratives. Ethan's family and supporters on one side, a smaller contingent of Mark's colleagues and distant relatives on the other. Inside Courtroom 7, the prosecution presented a straightforward case. Mark Bennett, upon discovering his wife's infidelity with his daughter's boyfriend, had lured the young man to the garage and brutally ended his life with 17 hammer strikes. This was not a momentary lapse, the prosecutor told jurors during opening statements. Mr. Bennett had hours to process his anger, yet chose the most violent resolution possible. Mark's defense team countered with a temporary insanity plea. Their argument hinged on the perfect storm of psychological triggers: the dual betrayal by wife and daughter's boyfriend, the public humiliation, and Mark's history of suppressing emotions. Mr. Bennett experienced a catastrophic break from reality, his attorney argued. In that moment, he literally could not distinguish right from wrong. The trial revealed details previously shielded from public view. Clara's testimony, given through tears and frequent pauses, exposed the emotional wasteland their marriage had become. She described years of isolation within their relationship, how Mark's emotional absence had created the vulnerability that Ethan exploited. "I'm not justifying what I did," she testified, "but we hadn't truly seen each other in years." Mark sat impassive throughout, his expression unchanged whether hearing explicit details of the affair or forensic descriptions of Ethan's injuries. Neighbors who took the stand painted a picture of gradual deterioration. The Christmas parties that stopped happening, the separate arrivals at school functions, the strained smiles at community events. "I noticed Clara seemed to light up whenever Ethan visited," one neighbor testified. At the time, I thought she was just happy her daughter had found someone nice. Psychological experts battled over Mark's mental state, dissecting his capacity for premeditation and impulse control. The prosecution psychiatrist testified that Mark's organized professional life suggested someone fully capable of controlling his actions. The defense countered with brain scans showing how extreme emotional trauma can temporarily shut down rational thought processes, likening Mark's state to a soldier experiencing combat stress. After 11 days of testimony and 14 hours of deliberation, the jury rejected the insanity plea. Mark Bennett was found guilty of second-degree murder. At sentencing, the judge acknowledged the extraordinary circumstances while emphasizing the brutality of the crime. The court recognizes the profound betrayal you experienced, he told Mark. However, nothing justifies taking another human life. The violence exhibited indicates a complete abandonment of restraint. Mark received 25 years to life, the maximum sentence for second-degree murder in that jurisdiction. Outside the courthouse, reactions split along predictable lines. Ethan's parents expressed relief while acknowledging nothing would bring back their son. Mark's supporters decried the sentence as excessive for a man with no prior criminal history. Was justice served in the Bennett case? What punishment fits a crime driven by such complex emotions? Share your thoughts on whether the legal system adequately addresses crimes of passion. Does a moment of violent rage deserve the same punishment as calculated murder? The Bennett tragedy represents a textbook case of how emotional neglect can create perfect conditions for catastrophe. Psychologists who studied the case identified a chain reaction of unmet needs that cascaded toward violence. Mark's emotional withdrawal created the initial fracture. His belief that financial provision equaled love left Clara starving for connection and validation. This emotional vacuum made her susceptible to inappropriate attention from Ethan, who himself sought adult approval and the thrill of forbidden behavior. Lily, caught between her parents' Cold War, missed the signals of betrayal because she had normalized dysfunction as routine family life. Each person in this triangle was attempting to fulfill legitimate human needs through destructive means, explained Dr. Eleanor Winters, forensic psychologist. Connection, validation, significance, these aren't luxury items. They're psychological necessities. The warning signs were subtle but numerous. Clara's sudden interest in youthful fashion and social media. Her eagerness for Ethan's visits even when Lily wasn't home. Mark's increasing hours at work to avoid family interaction. Ethan's decreased physical affection toward Lily while maintaining frequent visits to her home. The family's declining social calendar. Their separate lives under one roof. Most relationship violence doesn't appear from nowhere, Dr. Winters noted. It follows a traceable path of disconnection and resentment that, if recognized early, might be redirected. For Clara, the psychological aftermath manifested as complex PTSD. Therapy sessions revealed layers of guilt, not just for the affair, but for failing to recognize how her choices would affect her daughter. Her self-identity collapsed under conflicting narratives, victim of emotional neglect, yet perpetrator of betrayal, grieving the loss of her family, yet responsible for its destruction. Lily developed severe trust issues that threatened her ability to form new relationships. Every potential connection feels like a trap, she confided to her therapist. I look for hidden motives in everyone. Her grief process complicated by anger toward both parents. Lily struggled to separate her love for them from her rage at their actions. The Graystone Ridge community responded by creating discussion groups addressing relationship health. Parents organized workshops on recognizing emotional withdrawal in families. The high school implemented curriculum on healthy boundaries and conflict resolution. We needed to make meaning from this horror, explained the community center director. Understanding why it happened helps us prevent similar tragedies. Mental health professionals emphasize several critical lessons from the Bennett case. First, emotional disconnection in marriage creates vulnerability to external validation. The hunger for appreciation and desire is normal. The source matters critically. Second, healthy relationships require active communication about needs and boundaries. Silence doesn't preserve peace. It creates space for resentment to grow. Third, emotional suppression doesn't eliminate feelings. It transforms them into potentially dangerous pressure. Regular, honest expression of emotions acts as a necessary release valve. Fourth, recognizing inappropriate relationship patterns early allows intervention before devastating consequences occur. Age gap attractions often mask power imbalances and unmet needs rather than genuine connection. Finally, rebuilding after betrayal requires acknowledging all parties' humanity while maintaining clear boundaries around acceptable behavior. Understanding motivations doesn't excuse actions but helps prevent their repetition. The Bennett family's destruction serves as a powerful reminder that emotional health requires regular maintenance, honest communication, and appropriate boundaries. Elements too often neglected until crisis reveals their absence. 3 years after that fatal afternoon in the Bennett garage, the case exists as more than a sensational headline. It stands as a stark warning about the hidden costs of emotional disconnection and the dangerous paths we follow when seeking validation from the wrong sources. Clara Bennett now lives in a small apartment 2 states away, working as an administrative assistant and attending weekly therapy. The woman who once organized neighborhood fundraisers now keeps to herself, her previous identity erased by notoriety. Her artwork, abandoned for decades during her marriage, has become her primary emotional outlet. Each canvas reflects her ongoing struggle to reconcile guilt with the need to continue living. "I can't change what happened," she told a journalist in her only post-trial interview. "But I can choose to learn from it, to ensure my remaining years honor what was lost." Lily completed her degree in psychology, specializing in family trauma. Her research focuses on identifying early warning signs of relationship breakdown. The reconciliation with her mother remains fragile. Monthly phone calls and occasional visits marked by careful conversation and lingering pain. Her relationship with her father consists of supervised prison visits twice annually, where they discuss neutral topics and avoid mentioning the past. "Forgiveness isn't my goal," Lily explained to her support group. "Understanding is. I need to comprehend how good people can make devastating choices." In Graystone Ridge, the Bennett case transformed community awareness. Annual relationship workshops draw hundreds. School counselors receive enhanced training in recognizing family distress signals. The tragedy that once divided neighbors has evolved into a shared commitment to emotional health and open communication. The police detective who led the investigation now lectures on domestic violence prevention. The Bennett case wasn't just about infidelity or murder, he explains to law enforcement trainees. It was about what happens when emotional truth remains unexpressed until it's too late. True crime narratives often focus exclusively on the moment of violence, but the Bennett tragedy reminds us that catastrophic acts rarely occur in isolation. They represent the final collapse of systems already compromised by years of neglect, avoidance, and silent suffering. Trust, once broken, can never be fully restored to its original form. It may heal into something new, stronger in some places, permanently fragile in others, but the fracture lines remain visible. The Bennett family's destruction serves as testimony to this truth. What we refuse to address consciously will eventually express itself in ways beyond our control. The most important relationship skill isn't avoiding conflict, but engaging with it honestly before small fractures become catastrophic breaks. The warning signs existed long before violence erupted in that suburban garage. Recognition might have changed everything. If this story resonated with you or made you think differently about your own relationships, subscribe to our channel for more true crime analyses that go beyond sensationalism to explore the psychological truths behind these tragic events. Each story offers not just engagement, but education. Lessons that might help us recognize warning signs before they lead to irreversible consequences. Like, share, and comment below with your thoughts on this case.